Hey guys, my name's Alyssa, and for our theater research project, I decided to do the architecture surrounding theater. Originally, I wanted to cover chapter 1 through 10 in the textbook dealing with all types of architecture, but since we only have 10 minutes, I decided to stick with the beginning of architecture, starting with the Greeks all the way through Roman architecture. Just because of the time frame, and I wanted to make sure I could get a lot of information in during that time. So I'm going to be reading my paper because I chose to do the paper part of the project. So I may be looking down, but I hope you enjoy and I hope you learn something from it. So throughout this course, we have been learning all about the history of theater surrounding different time periods and locations. With this, we have seen that different eras in theater all embody different aspects that make each time period unique. While studying theater, the architecture has continued to fascinate me because you can learn so many things about theater during a certain era just by researching the theatrical design. When you really break apart the reasoning behind certain architectural decisions, it allows for you to fully immerse oneself into the theater during that time period to truly understand the evolution of these theaters. Throughout my research, I focused on architecture of the theaters from the beginning up until Roman theaters. When discussing the design of theater, we can determine that ancient Greece played a big role in the roots in the 6th century BCE. Even though there's evidence that suggests the Middle East, Africa, and the Americas played a big role in founding theater, nothing can be concluded from this because, as we have learned in the first chapter of our textbook, Brockett states that the definition of theater during the time was very ambiguous. Since it is very hard to determine what theater truly consisted of during this time, it is difficult to determine the influence when the origin cannot be 100% traced. However, we do know that in regards to the architecture, the main influence focused primarily on the ancient Greece. In Greece, theatrical areas were located on a common public grounds. This consisted of theaters being located near temples and in central places. The actual structure of theatrical areas consisted of steps made out of wood that would eventually be reconstructed into stone for a more steady structure. In our textbook, Brockett states it has a stone risers for a standing audience of about 500 arranged on two sides of a rectangular performance area approximately 40 by 35 feet. During this section of the text, Brockett is referring to the oldest known theatrical area, which is the Mahon Palace at Phaistos. This theatrical area was very minimalistic in terms of architecture. The performing area did not have any significant aspects that made it stand out from the rest of the design. In this time period, the majority of theaters consisted of a rectangular shape. However, a popular theater known as the Theater of Dionysus, located in Athens, consisted of a more semicircular shape. A change was made in the shape of the theater to allow for better views of the performing areas for a larger group of people. As we already know, during this time period, technology was not available in terms of audio. By changing the shape of the theater, it also allowed for a better sound projection. When the shape of the theater was altered, it allowed for sound to travel further and evenly. This was even a way that the Greeks changed the architectural design to make advancements in production. A feature that also added to the theater was the orchestra, which was a dancing space. This space was usually around 60 feet in diameter. Another prominent architectural feature in the theater was known as the scene, which is the scene building. This was primarily used as a dressing room for actors, but would eventually evolve into a more permanent structure to act as scenery for performances. Two other devices of the scene were added and were used to represent a change in the place in regards to the scene. Both of these devices were an advancement that allowed the play to depict multiple locations in a convenient way. During this time period, there were changes and additions that were constantly being made. One of the additions that was made to the Theater of Dionysus was when the Odeon was added. This would eventually become the first theater that had a roof. When looking at the structural part of this theater, Brockett states that there were wooden posts to support the scene and stone surface area to act as a foundation. The change in structural design, as I'm sure you can imagine, was a huge change to now have a covering over theatrical events when they were performed. This added a totally new ambiance to the theatrical architecture. Since we have already discussed the architectural elements in regards to the staging, the structural design of the auditorium was equally as important. I briefly discussed the shape and changing from rectangular shape to a semicircular shape to allow for a better view of the theatrical performing area. However, Brockett and Hidley states, and I quote, "The eye was not restricted to the interior of the theater, but rather situated to see the theater as a part of a larger world whose drama was symbolically played out on stage." From this, I believe that it shows how much thought the Greeks put into the designing. They wanted you to notice what was going on in the world around you in a symbolic way. By researching the architecture, I found that every architectural decision was done with a purpose for either the audience or for the actors. As time progressed, the theater continued to make architectural advances. Moving into the Hellenistic period, as mentioned in one of my scholarly sources, a stage that was risen was added. The dimensions of the stage were usually 8 to 14 feet in height. Other theaters that serve as an example of this are the theaters of Ephesus. When moving into the concern of the audience, there wasn't many differences. The auditorium only made a slight accommodations to allow for a larger capacity, which due to the growth of theater interest. Overall, the structural differences that were being made were all a part of a bigger picture of evolving theater architecture. Roman theater architecture began with the Theater of Pompey, which was the first permanent theater building in Rome. During this era, the theaters started to become more extravagant. The first theaters that we have discussed were plain and only served as a place for performances. However, Roman theaters started to expand the design to allow for a more appealing experience for spectators. Brockett and Hidley state that the theaters of the Roman era consisted of columns, marble, and bronze statues. In terms of location, these theaters were built on both level grounds and the hillside. However, the hillside theaters tended to remain stronger in structure when compared to those built on flat ground. While researching on the website Britannica, it examined how Greeks valued the countryside views, and they built the theaters into wherever the hillside allowed. However, during the Roman era, the scenic views outside the performance area did not hold as much value as they did before, so theaters were created wherever they saw best fit. So essentially, they didn't build into the nature of the earth, but instead wherever it was most convenient. The architecture of this time period consisted of stairwells to allow spectators easy access to exits for a more natural flow. In our textbook, it notes that the stage house and their auditorium were joined from a single architectural unit the same height all the way around. This only allowed the audience to have viewing access inside the perimeter of the theater rather than the outside as well. Just as the Greeks did, this era of theaters also consisted of roof theaters, which were referred to as audium. Since the theaters did have a roof, to add light to the theaters, windows were added. Author Frederick Prenzel indicates that these windows were added to add illumination to the theater. As far as the architecture surrounding the stage, a roof was added to the stage. This was to further improve the acoustics surrounding the theater. It was also used to protect the scanae fronds, which is the elaborate architectural background. Some examples of theater during this time were the Roman theater of Ostia, the theater of Orange. Overall, the Roman theater had many of the same characteristics of the Greek theater, but made progressions to incorporate a new style. As you can see, theater has made great advancements. The theater started out as a very minimalistic style and started to transform into a place of an extravagant theatrical viewing. I hope you learned a little bit about the architecture surrounding theater. Even though I was not able to cover every detail surrounding architecture, I hope that this gave you an overall picture of the evolution of theaters and why the changes were being made. Thanks for watching my video, and I hope you have a great summer. And also, I am very sorry if I butchered some of these terms, but I did as best as I could. And like I said, I hope you have a great summer. Thanks for watching.